in Catholicism lead to a radical version of Eastern Orthodoxy? Orthodox apologist Jay Dyer says yes, and he is going to connect the dots for us. And what I'm going to do is review that and criticize and critique both the Rad Trad position and the radical Orthodox position and show why both of them are wrong. Stay tuned for more.
Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, art everywhere present and fill us all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell within us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, both now and ever and unto the ages of ages. Amen.
Many know that I have been ringing the alarm, sounding the alarm, if you will, on some issues that I see in Catholicism, where I've noted that some of the radical tendencies that some Catholics maintain will lead to, for example, sedevacantism. And we recently saw sedevacantists in a recent debate connect the dots for everybody. And show that, again, a lot of the positions that some Catholics have already bought into are sedevacantist positions in effect, and or radical Eastern Orthodox positions. So I've already engaged the sedevacantist issue, and I've, again, connected the dots for many people, but I think it was beneficial for people to see a sedevacantist actually do it. But now I'm going to review a radical Eastern Orthodox apologist who himself is going to connect the dots for various groups in Catholicism, especially followers of Taylor Marshall and also adherents to the Society of St. Pius X. He's going to connect the dots and show how a lot of it should lead to Eastern Orthodoxy in abandoning Catholicism. Now, for background, that's exactly what Jay Dyer did. Jay Dyer used to be, many years ago, a Protestant. He read his way into Catholicism. For a while, he was a Catholic, and then he kind of ended up going into its more radical forms, your radical traditionalist positions. He adhered to that for a while, so he was a radical traditionalist. And he eventually started to question that and then look into Eastern Orthodoxy. He did that for a little while, and then he repented of that and went back to radical traditionalism and Catholicism. And then he started to question it again. And so he once again then goes to Eastern Orthodoxy. He did not formally convert yet, but he started to do apologetics for Eastern Orthodoxy and did that for many years. And then after a while, he converted to Judaism for a period of time and was arguing against the Trinity and things like that. And then he repented of the Judaism and then went back to Eastern Orthodoxy, continued to defend it, but had not been received into it yet. Did that for a few years and then was finally received into Eastern Orthodoxy just a few years ago. And then he moved jurisdictions a few times within Eastern Orthodoxy to one of the more radical versions of Eastern Orthodoxy. And so that's kind of where Jay Dyer is at. So Jay Dyer has been living this experience of, trying to connect the dots from radical traditionalism to where it leads to. And it's led him to a very radical version of Eastern Orthodoxy. And so that's what I want to review, where he's going to go over some of the problems in the radical traditionalist movement, some of their inconsistencies. And he's going to say, look, why are you guys even Catholic? Which is what I've been saying. I've been saying, look, you guys have already been bought into a position that's not Catholic. You're incredibly inconsistent. Eventually, if you're going to carry your position to its logical conclusion, it will lead you to sedevacantism or perhaps a radical version of Eastern Orthodoxy or something else. But at the same time, I'm not only going to critique that position in the Rad Trads, I'm also going to critique Jay Dyer in his position because I say both are wrong. I say Rad Trads and Jay Dyer in their position, the radical Orthodox, they're all wrong because they've all bought into the same premises. And that's what I want to question. It's those premises that I'm going to question. Okay, let's go over it. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see here. This is from a video clip. Jay Dyer on Roman Catholicism. Dyer clips. All right. Let's review about 10 minutes of this thing. And I think that will be sufficient to make the point.
Michael Matt is basically saying that, well, Francis doesn't tell anybody about the gospel, and he doesn't tell people they need to convert to Christ, which is true. But now, wait a minute. So, but this is the supreme teacher of all Christians. This is not just a priest or some random lay Catholic person failing to do their duty. This is the supreme pastor of all Christians.
Now, did you notice they both have bought into that narrative? That Pope Francis thinks that, you know, and he's telling people you don't have to convert to Christ. They both have bought into that narrative, and both of them are wrong. As I recently demonstrated, I did a whole video responding to the radical traditionalists who say that Pope Francis is against proselytism, and here they interpret that to mean evangelization to Christianity, to Christ. And I show that's not at all true, and there is plenty of evidence and many instances where Pope Francis has spoken about evangelization and bringing people to Christianity and bringing people to Christ. So maybe go and watch that video. In fact, I'll put it there in the show notes as soon as this ends. It was last week, so you should be able to find it. If you maybe just type in Pope Francis, proselytism, reason, and theology, it should come right up. But see, both of them have bought into that narrative. In Jay Dyer's case, he bought into that narrative and he says, well, look, this doesn't make sense because this is supposed to be the supreme pastor, and yet he's telling people not to convert to Christianity. Well, this system is false. I'm going to go elsewhere. But I'm going to say, but wait, I question that. That's actually not what Pope Francis is doing. All right, let's continue.
Guess what, Francis? Jordan Peterson doesn't care, and nor should he, nor does any other serious thinking human being on the planet. Going after the Latin Mass now. Is anything he can possibly do to crush the old faith, lest someone like Jordan Peterson should, by mistake.
Did you notice that he equated the Latin Mass with the old faith? That's the problem. And I've already done a video engaging the question of Pope Francis and Traditionis Custodes. I'll put that also in the description. Go and check it out, because I think that we can actually have legitimate concerns and legitimate criticisms of Traditionis Custodes without taking this other more extreme position that says, oh, well, he's attacking the traditional faith, and he's attacking the Latin Mass, and he's attacking the traditional liturgy. All of that should be questioned, and one should not identify the Missal of 62 with the Roman Rite. The Roman Rite has undergone a lot of changes in 2,000 years. And one should certainly not identify the Latin Mass, as it's called, with the faith. Those are not on the same, they're not equal to each other. There's certainly some important distinctions that need to be made there. I mean, in fact, if you were to have the Latin Mass disappear on the from the face of the earth, do you maintain that the faith has now disappeared? So literally none of the other liturgies embody sacred tradition. It's only the Latin Mass that embodies the faith. Is that really the position that we're adopting here? Okay.
Stumble upon the truth.
Now, wait a minute. Francis is at war with the traditional liturgy and Mass.
And notice how Jay Dyer has also bought into that. He's right there with the radical traditionalists. He's bought into the same things that they've bought into, and he shouldn't. He shouldn't have, and we shouldn't. And that's what I want to question. But watch, he's going to say, yeah, he's at war with the spiritual tradition. He's at war with sacred tradition and with the faith.
He's at war with the faith and at war with the gospel. But remember, according to Michael Matt and all of these people, Francis is also still the infallible, indefectible supreme teacher of all Christians. He is the living embodiment of Peter and Christ as the successor to Peter, the vicar of Christ, and has the charism of the Holy Spirit. And he's indefectible, meaning, remember, if you want to argue with the Roman Catholics, you'll go in circles all day long about what qualifies.
Let me stop there. Indefectible. I mean, I would say that the Roman See is indefectible. This is taught by an ecumenical council that Eastern Orthodox accept, and this is where Eastern Orthodox are inconsistent, because again, Agatho's letter to the emperor, read out loud at the Sixth Ecumenical Council, was embraced by the Council Fathers there. They accepted it, and that letter testifies to the indefectibility of the teaching office of the Roman See. Orthodox have already accepted that. So Jay Dyer is inconsistent with his ecumenical councils that he professes to maintain. And I've gone into that in more detail. So just type in maybe Michael Lofton, Pope Agatha, plenty of stuff will come up. So in fact, I just did another video on it recently, just a few days ago. So you can see now inconsistencies with the Orthodox position, because now Orthodoxy, or at least Jay Dyer is an Orthodox adherent, or at least a radical version of it, is going to critique this concept of Roman indefectibility, and yet his own councils teach it. And there are other instances. It's not just the Sixth Ecumenical Council. So that's a problem for him, but that's an inconsistency he's going to have to work through. But notice there, he's buying into the same premises that the radical traditionalist crowd have bought into, especially the crowd that you see surrounding Taylor Marshall and that group. And once again, that's what I want to question. Moreover, I do want to be specific on what we mean by indefectibility of the Roman See. It doesn't mean that every decision that the Pope makes prudentially is going to be right. That's not necessarily the case. It does, however, mean that you are going to have certain teachings that are protected from error in particular instances, and also that other teachings that may not necessarily have that charism of infallibility would at least be protected as theologically safe, so that if you were to adhere to them, you were to adhere to what the Roman Pontiff has said, or an ecumenical council in this instance has said, you would not have bought into something that will damn your soul. It would be theologically safe. That's the traditional Catholic perspective on teaching authority, which neither the radical traditionalists nor Jay Dyer maintain, and that's part of their problem. They're, number one, misunderstanding what it means by Roman indefectibility, and then one of them goes one direction to Eastern Orthodoxy, and I want to say, but you've already accepted Roman indefectibility in your council, so you're inconsistent. And then as far as the others who are adhering to the radical traditionalist position and still remain in Catholic communion, at least externally, I'm not so sure about internally, but externally, they remain to an extent in Catholic communion, depending on their situation. They are buying into something that is completely contradictory to itself, because they're saying, hey, look, this is the successor to St. Peter. He's the shepherd on the universal level, and they're adhering to Vatican I that has certain promises to the Roman See, and not just in its teaching office whenever it's infallible, but also in its teaching office as a whole. They're buying into that, and yet they're saying that, look, this guy is a heretic, he's an apostate, he's over the New World Order, and he's trying to destroy the church. So it's an internally inconsistent position. But then again, the solution that Jay Dyer is going to offer is also inconsistent. What I'm going to say is question all of that. Don't accept any of that. Don't accept any of these claims that both of them have bought into. Question those things.
Argue with the Roman Catholics, you'll go in circles all day long about what qualifies as infallible and what doesn't. And every different Roman Catholic has a different criteria, and nobody even knows. But no.
All right. Well, this is certainly an interesting critique coming from an Orthodox, since Orthodoxy doesn't have any kind of way to objectively identify what is definitive, which, again, I've gone over recently. I talked about that in my interview with Pints with Aquinas, for instance. I also just went over that in my critique of Orthodox priest Father Farley on whether or not there's an Orthodox magisterium. So look into that for more. But Orthodoxy doesn't have a way to identify what is definitive for the vast majority of instances. So I think that that's an inconsistent, critique, because he suffers from that same critique. But he might say, but you guys are making more claims than we as Orthodox are making. Oh, okay, well, fair enough. We are making some claims to infallibility and identifying infallibility. But what I want to say is the criteria of Vatican I is clear enough to identify what is infallible by the Pope. And if there is an instance where it's not clear, we can always go back to the magisterium and ask for clarification and repeat that process until it becomes absolutely abundantly clear that something has been taught definitively or not taught definitively. Again, I go into that in more context in the response that I offered to Father Andrew Domick on orthodoxy and heterodoxy here on this channel. So maybe check that one out if you want more details on that. The thing here, though, is Catholicism has this ability to definitively settle matters of faith and morals. In the vast majority of instances, the criteria of Vatican I that it lays out there is very easy to identify. So you're able to determine if the Pope is taught infallibly on something. In some very rare cases, there might be some questions. But in those instances, we can, again, go back to the magisterium and until we get that definitive clarification. And an Orthodox like Jay Dyer, I don't think that he's probably the best expression or most authentic expression of Orthodoxy, but he's going to claim to be an Eastern Orthodox. An Orthodox like Jay Dyer is going to say, but this stuff is just still unclear. But he would still, on the other hand, say, but you guys infallibly teach the Immaculate Conception. He would acknowledge that. My question is, how do you say as an Orthodox that we are teaching that for our adherents, they have to maintain the Immaculate Conception, and then in our communion, it's infallible? We at least teach it as infallible. How is it that we have enough clarity there that even an Eastern Orthodox knows that, yes, you guys do claim that your teaching on the Immaculate Conception is infallible? He may not accept the teaching and he may not believe it's infallible, but he will say, but you guys teach it's infallible. Okay, so it is then clear enough that we can identify when a pope teaches infallibly, because it was a pope who taught the Immaculate Conception infallibly. So if that is clear enough, then you already acknowledge that we do, as Catholics, have the ability to identify what is infallible, because you yourself acknowledge this has been taught infallibly by a pope according to us. So again, there's an inconsistency here. He's presenting the case as if, oh, there's really no way to identify what is taught by papal infallibility. And yet, on the other hand, he'll go and critique the Immaculate Conception. And if I were to come and say, oh, well, I don't have to accept the Immaculate Conception as a Catholic, he would say, yes, you do. Your church teaches this, and by papal infallibility, it teaches, and you have to accept this as a Catholic. But wait, I thought that we couldn't determine what was infallible. You see the inconsistency here?
None of them even know they'll give you 4 or 5 basic general criteria, which
it's actually 3. 2 of the criteria that you find there in Vatican I, as I've noted, are just re-expressions of some of the other criteria. So it's actually only 3 criteria for Vatican I that are essential criteria. The Pope has to speak as the universal shepherd, it has to be on a matter of faith and morals, and he has to be defining something. It has to be those 3 criteria.
Doesn't tell you in specific cases which things actually are infallible or not.
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. It gave you the criteria. You then take that criteria and you apply it to specific cases, which you yourself acknowledge we're able to identify in the case of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, the Immaculate Conception. So you already acknowledge that we can use and employ that criteria and identify it in particular instances. So
always go to the issue of indefectibility. Now, wait a minute. Is the Roman See indefectible and its occupants, or?
It is, but what do we mean by indefectibility? So that's what's going to be important. This is where I think both Jay Dyer and also a lot of the radical traditionalists are weak. What do we mean by indefectibility? In summary, although you could get Father Sylvester Berry's work on the Church of Christ, and he'll talk about indefectibility in more detail, or really just get any of the manualists, maybe Saliveri or somebody like that, or perhaps Ludwig Ott or Van Noort. Those are great guys that you can consult on what indefectibility means. But effectively, the things that we profess in the creed, one holy Catholic apostolic, those properties of the church, they are going to be there in the Roman See, and they will be there perpetually. So it's not going to, the Roman See is not going to do something that it's no longer one, it's no longer holy, it's no longer Catholic, it's no longer apostolic. And that does touch on areas related to the teaching office and also the liturgy. And my problem with some of the radical traditionalists is they bought into a narrative about the teaching office of Pope Francis specifically, but also some of the other post-conciliar popes, and maybe even Vatican II. And they've also bought into some things about the liturgy in the Roman Rite in the post-conciliar era that I think does violence to the indefectibility of the Roman See. So I think that the radical traditionalists are inconsistent when it comes to indefectibility. However, Jay Dyer, where he is wrong is he's going to assume that Pope Francis and others in the post-conciliar era have done things that have violated the indefectibility in the Roman See. And that's what I'm going to question. I'm going to say, no, he hasn't. Both the radical traditionalists and radical Orthodox like Jay Dyer are going to say Pope Francis, Vatican II, John Paul II, and others are guilty of instances that shows that the Roman indefectibility is no longer there. I question that. And moreover, I once again say, but that does violence to your position as an Eastern Orthodox as well, because you guys already accepted Roman indefectibility at the Sixth Ecumenical Council, among other places. You've already accepted that. So if we're wrong about that, you guys are too. So we need to start looking into something else, like maybe Oriental Orthodoxy, because they didn't accept the Sixth Ecumenical Council. They didn't accept those claims, so they're not as committed as Eastern Orthodox to some of these things. Maybe we need to start looking into other options at that point.
Can they defect and still remain Pope? Now, anybody in our audience who has read Vatican I?
By the way, did you notice he said, can they defect and still remain Pope? There is a distinction here between the occupant of the See of Rome and the See of Rome itself. The question of whether or not the individual who occupies the See of Rome can be a heretic is going to be distinct from whether or not he can teach heresy in his office. Those are two different things. One relates to the occupant as a private person. The other relates to the actual See and the actual teaching office itself. But you notice that he just conflated those two things instead of making a really important distinction there. We can have the question on what do we do if the occupant is personally guilty of heresy? He doesn't teach it in his office, but he's personally guilty of that. How does that then impact the Roman office? It impacts the Roman office in the exact same way you Eastern Orthodox already accepted Roman indefectibility and yet condemned Honorius as a heretic. It affects it in that way. Again, I've gone into more details on the case of Honorius. That was in the Father Stephen Andrew Domick video where I engage orthodoxy and heterodoxy. So I show how we can reconcile the condemnation of Honorius with the same council who actually teaches Roman indefectibility of the teaching office of the Roman See. So I have a solution for that. I don't see Orthodox having a solution for that. So
knows that this issue has already been settled. I mean, has Michael Matt read Vatican I? Doesn't it tell you that the Roman See cannot defect?
Well, this is one point that I've brought up, because some radical traditionalists want to say, well, look, all Vatican I is doing is saying that the Pope is infallible when he teaches ex cathedra, and that's all they're aware of. They're not aware of other things in the same document taught by Vatican I that says, but the teaching office and the entire office of the Pope is going to be, to one extent or another, protected by the Holy Spirit. So that is indefectibility, which is why I have a problem whenever you have radical traditionalists that are accusing the Pope of teaching heresy, because yes, they actually say he teaches heresy. For instance, Taylor Marshall claims that on multiple occasions, that Pope Francis teaches heresy, and also that Vatican II has taught heresy. He accuses it of Pelagianism, which is a condemned heresy. I have a problem with that, because that does do violence to some things in Vatican I. It also does violence to Pope Pius XII and some things that he says in Humani Generis. It does violence to Donum Veritatis, among other places. And so, and also it's just the position that the Catholic theologians have rejected. They don't accept that teaching, that the Pope could teach heresy in his office. The question of whether or not he could personally be a heretic is very distinct from whether or not he could teach it, however, in his office. They're going to say no, that there's this kind of there's this safety there, even when he's not teaching infallibly. And this is also expressed and reiterated in some very, very helpful homilies by John Paul II. And I've spoken about this infallible safety before, so I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here. But you'll notice Jay Dyer is actually bringing up a good point here. It's one of the same points that I've brought against the radical traditionalists. Where I'm going to disagree with Dyer is I'm going to say, but wait, I don't grant the claim that Pope Francis or anyone after Vatican II or Vatican II itself is guilty of something that does violence to indefectibility. I'm not going to grant that. And moreover, how are you as an Eastern Orthodox consistent when you already accepted the divine institution of the papacy in your ecumenical councils, including indefectibility of the Roman See?
Yeah. So stories about La Salette and stories about the eclipse of the church.
And the story about La Salette, the additional phrase that was later on added, and I've gone into this in more detail elsewhere, maybe just type in Michael Lofton La Salette, it should come up. That additional part where it talks about this, it talks about Rome will defect from the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist, which Vigano actually repeated a few years back. That, unfortunately, for radical traditionalists is something that was added later and was not approved by Rome and is found on the Index of Forbidden Books. To my knowledge, it was never removed from the Index of Forbidden Books. We might not have canonical penalties for the Index of Forbidden Books today, but it's still, you have a moral responsibility to adhere to it. And so, moreover, you could note that, okay, Rome losing the faith doesn't necessarily mean that the See of Rome loses the faith. It could mean the people of the city of Rome loses the faith. And so, but I just question the authenticity of that addition that's added to the prophecy of La Salette to begin with. And why are we appealing to these private revelations when we have sacred scripture itself that would overturn that, and we have ecumenical councils that would overturn that is way more authoritative than private revelations anyway? So yeah, this is the kind of stuff that a lot of Orthodox have bought into. They bought into those La Salette arguments and the radical traditionalist content, and they look at this and they say, well, I'm buying into this, and this doesn't make sense for me to remain Catholic. Therefore, I'm going to go Sedevacantists, I'm going to go Eastern Orthodox. Then they get to Orthodoxy. They see that their bishops are sitting there praying, with Vespers and other services and ecumenical gatherings with Catholics. And so they're like, okay, I just left this. I don't want to be in communion with these guys. So then they leave that for more radical versions of Orthodoxy, like Jay Dyer has done. And sometimes they feel like even that group is not Orthodox enough because they're not following the canons. And then they go into more extreme versions of Orthodoxy, breakaway groups in Orthodoxy. They're called the true Orthodox. These are the ones that are not canonically in communion with world Orthodoxy. They're these breakaway groups. In fact, I did a whole video on that not long ago. I did put it in the show note description on true Orthodox. I did a whole video reviewing all these breakaway groups in Orthodoxy and how this mentality that people like Jay Dyer have bought into leads them into those really radical breakaway groups within Orthodoxy. Because again, they've already bought into this concept of I'm sitting here privately judging my patriarch. They already bought into that when they were Catholic, because they did that to the Pope. So whenever they come to Eastern Orthodoxy, they're privately judging their own patriarch and their own bishop. And then they feel like, well, my bishop is violating this canon. And my canon, there's canon saying that you can't pray with Catholics. And I'm seeing my bishop praying with Catholics. Therefore, I have to be out. I have to go to someone else who's following the canons. And then they shift communions and go to somewhere else. And again, they're not good enough for them. And so they go somewhere else. And before you know it, they're in this group that it's literally them and just a few other people. That's where, unfortunately, the radical traditionalism that figures like Jay Dyer have bought into, that's where it takes you. Some people take it to sedevacantism and break away into a group where there's literally two people in a fake monastery somewhere who are claiming to be the ones who are preserving the faith. And then others kind of go the Orthodox route and end up going into breakaway groups that are also pretty small.
Because that's pre-Vatican I. Vatican I settled any of that would be in dispute for a Roman Catholic. Meaning, the received occupant of the Roman see. What do you mean by received? Well, when the Roman College elects a pope, and when it's been accepted by the college and then by the Roman Catholic world, that's the pope. Canon law is very clear.
And that is true. And that's one of the arguments I use against the sedevacantists and also benevacantists.
Clear that you have to accept who the Roman college accepts. And if you're going to say with the sedevacantists that, well, the Roman college has apostatized. Oh, so then it's lost its constituent elements. That
I wouldn't say the Roman college, like if he's talking about the College of Cardinals as a constituent element to the church, because there were obviously many instances in church history. We didn't have a College of Cardinals. There were other ways in which a pope was elected, but canonically today, yeah, you have to have the College of Cardinals. So until a pope changes that canonically, it would make no sense that God would put us in a situation where we can't canonically elevate anyone else to the Roman see. So I would tweak what he's saying here, just make it a little bit more nuanced, and then I would actually be in agreement with it. And I use that argument again against the sedevacantists and also the benevacantists.
That is had according to Vatican I. It's no longer a public, unifying, visible see in Rome, the city over in Rome, the city that is Rome, excuse me, in Italy, the city-state, by the way. I mean, Vatican I is very clear. Canon law is very clear that, like, you have to accept that dude. You can't pick them. You can't be a Protestant with your popes. Now, Michael Matt and all of the SSPX and all of the trads, they know that, and they have to have this preposterous position of.
And here I'm in agreement with Jay. It is a preposterous position, and I've been calling out the radical traditionalists for their inconsistency. It is preposterous. It's absurd. It's internally inconsistent. And if you've bought into this, my question is, why are you Catholic? As I've been saying, you're ripe for the picking by guys like Jay Dyer. As soon as you see this, you're probably watching this right now thinking, oh gosh, I am really in agreement with Jay Dyer. What does that mean for me? I've been saying you're ripe for the picking. You're ripe for the picking for sedevacantist groups who are going to prey on you. You're ripe for the picking for other groups who are also going to prey on you. You're ripe for the picking. I'm saying question all of it. All of those premises that you bought into, you need to be questioning those. But you've bought into them, and now you bought into something internally inconsistent. And so guys like Jay Dyer are going to rightly point it out. I'm just going to, however, not only challenge the premises, but I'm going to come back to Jay Dyer and say, look, you're internally inconsistent too, because you've already bought into the Roman indefectibility in the first millennium. You don't recognize it, but your church has already bought into that in the ecumenical councils. So you're also just as inconsistent. You just don't see it.
Mental gymnastics to make the system work, by which an apostate who doesn't follow the gospel, who wars against the truth, wars against Christ, wars against tradition and against the church, is also the supreme infallible teacher of all.
You see, Jay Dyer's also bought into that. And that's one of the reasons why he left Catholicism. He bought into this idea that Vatican II revolutionized the church and is at war with tradition. He bought into all that the popes in the post-conciliar era are at war with tradition. And so he says, look, this doesn't make sense. And he goes elsewhere.
All Christians and the Vicar of Christ. This is why this position leads people to alcoholism, atheism, and mental instability.
What? Alcoholism? What? I guess it could. Like, I mean, I guess some people like having these, internally inconsistent positions, and that confusion could lead maybe some people to alcoholism. I don't know. That was just a weird dot to connect. I'm not sure that logically follows, right? I mean, there could be people who are struggling with alcoholism for other reasons, and there could be other people who are struggling with these issues, and they're not led to atheism or alcoholism. However, some of them are effectively led to atheism. I warned about the Steve Skojec issue. You've bought into all this stuff. This is going to lead you outside of the church. He's bought into agnosticism. It's sad because sometimes it could lead to these things. It could lead to alcoholism or despair or agnosticism, as Jay Dyer is saying here. But that was just a weird comment to me. It doesn't have to lead. There's plenty of people who have this inconsistency and they don't go that route. They just become radical Eastern Orthodox.
Because that is a fundamental stupid contradiction. Both of those things can't be true. I can't accept an antichrist as the vicar of Christ, and yet all of you do. And yet you go crazy, and yet you become alcoholics, and yet you're miserable and unhappy, and you go after me for telling you the truth.
I'm not exactly sure that's why some people go after Jay Dyer. I mean, maybe that's why, but there's also a lot of character problems that I've seen from Jay Dyer publicly. That could also be one of the reasons why some of them, go after Jay. I don't know. I'm sure it's multifaceted.
That's what he's doing. Oh yes, this movement of large families, faithful men and women going to Latin masses, according to Francis, all those little children that they're having, this has to stop. Because if it doesn't stop, why, it could take down the entire New World Order. And guess what?
Yeah. So this is absurd. The reason why Pope Francis has taken his position against the TLM and restricting it, not eliminating it, but restricting it, the reason why he has done that is for the exact same thing that he actually tells you. And it's because he sees a lot of dissent in this community. And that's true. There is a lot of dissent in this community. I, however, critique whether or not that's the appropriate solution to then restrict the TLM. I agree that there's a lot of dissent in that community. My question of Traditionis Custodes is that really necessary to address the schismatic mentality of some people in that community? I think there's other ways to address schismatics who find themselves in that community without punishing the other people that go to the TLM who are not schismatic. I think there's a way to balance that and address the schismatics without punishing the non-schismatics. And so I do question the prudence and the measures, the disciplinary measures that he's taken against the restriction of Traditionis Custodes. I just don't think that that's the best solution right now, especially given the fact that we need to fix the way the Novus Ordo is being celebrated in many instances if we're going to restrict the TLM. If we're going to do that, then give people a really good Novus Ordo that is like something St. John Cantius offers, and then we can talk about restricting the TLM. Until then, I'm not so sure that that's a good idea. There's other ways to deal with schismatics. Let's look at some of those other options. But I don't think that Pope Francis is at war against the liturgy itself and just hates that and just hates tradition and all the spin that the Rad Trads are putting on it and the spin that Jay Dyer has bought into. I don't think that we have to go to that. I think that we can question those things. And I think we can be balanced and criticize some aspects of Traditionis Custodes without going the internally inconsistent Rad Trad route or the radical Orthodox route or the set of concepts route.
Because if it doesn't stop, why, it could take down the entire New World Order. And guess what, Francis? You're right about that one. You're right about that.
Now, wait a minute. So Michael Matt admits that Francis is part of the New World Order. So essentially he's in on the satanic antichrist system.
And this is also something that we see with Vigano. These are the kind of claims that some of the radical traditionalists are making. And I'm in agreement with Jay Dyer. If you believe that, why are you Catholic? Why are you in communion with the Pope that you believe is ushering in the New World Order and is ushering in the system of the Antichrist? You're in communion with that guy? Why? What does that say about you?
He's a promoter of it, in on it. But remember, he's still the supreme, infallible, indefectible teacher of all Christians and the vicar of Jesus. So how is a person who is essentially in every aspect of their being Antichrist the representative of Jesus. This is the
Yeah, if he's bringing this stuff into the office of the papacy, that does create a falsification of the Catholic system. Like, again, there, I would say if privately he has problems, that's one thing, but if in his office as Pope he's ushering in the system of the Antichrist, which a lot of radical traditionalists would say, then yeah, you've bought into something internally inconsistent. And Jay Dyer's right to criticize you here, but I'm just saying, question that system that you bought into, question those premises, and also don't go the Jay Dyer route, because you'll just go from one internally inconsistent position to another internally inconsistent position, because you're just relocating it, because now you're adopting a communion that claims to maintain the faith of the first millennium, and then also claims that the Roman See is defectible, and yet in the first millennium they're saying otherwise. So
stupidity, foolishness, idolatry, and
how did we get into idolatry here? I don't know any radical traditionalists engaging in idolatry, but okay.
insanity of the Roman Catholic system. You're constantly told and forced to accept bold, outright contradictions because the dogma says so. And then when you see that there are these wild, outrageous contradictions, you must then run to every possible mental gymnastic to seethe and to cope.
Yeah, but again, Jay Dyer is going to have to engage in what he's calling mental gymnastics in many aspects. And again, just maybe go through the Eastern Orthodoxy playlist that I have, and you'll start to see that.
To make it work, but it doesn't work because it's not true. And it's self-evident that that is not true. How can a person be Antichrist? We're not just talking about moral failings, right? So what's every trad say? Well, he could still be the Pope even if he's a sinner, because we're all sinners and we're not Donatists. No. The issue is not sinner or perfect. The issue is apostasy and heresy.
And how many radical traditionalists are accusing Pope Francis of apostasy and heresy?
And in Roman Catholic theology and canon law, those are different categories of sins than even mortal sins.
Yeah, except none of those things in canon law actually speak about how this works in relation to a person who occupies the chair of St. Peter. That's the problem. That's why we have these debates on what would we do if a pope in his private person becomes a heretic. That's why we have these debates. But I will say that I don't grant that Pope Francis in his private person is an apostate or a heretic or anything like that. I don't grant that yet. If you can give me evidence of it, I'll look into it, but I haven't seen evidence for that, so I don't grant that. But even if in his private person, that's one thing. If it's in his office, that's another. And if he's teaching heresy in his office, I'd say, yeah, that's a problem. I would say that you would have to, if you're claiming he teaches heresy in his office, even if it's non-definitive, as I've already said in previous videos, I would say, number one, that goes against some things that the magisterium has said. But if that were to happen, we then have to reinterpret what those things the magisterium has said, so much so that we're limiting indefectibility to mere ex cathedra teachings. Can you do that and still make Catholicism work? Yes. As I've noted before, that whole video I did with classical theists, I admit that you could still rework it. It would be a very tough sell, because you're going to have to reinterpret a lot of things from the magisterium that I just think is really straining in as far as interpretation. But it wouldn't automatically invalidate Catholicism if you have it in some like non-definitive capacity or something like that. But I do think that it would do a lot of violence to the credibility of the Catholic system, because you would have to rework so many things. And that's one of the problems that I have with that position, aside from the fact that I just think that that position is not the position that the magisterium has proposed. So, okay.
Those are sins such that they make you automatically defect from the church. So
yeah, see, for a pope though, I still question that. Upon what basis do you say a pope who is a heretic privately automatically defects from the papacy? Upon what basis do you say that? That's an opinion that Jay Dyer is expressing here. That's not anything that has been substantiated in canon law. And there are other opinions in Catholicism that would say otherwise. And they seem actually a little bit more convincing than the automatic loss of office position that Bellarmine maintained. Although Bellarmine believed this would have never happened, but he believed that, you know, a pope who is privately a heretic, who is obstinate after two canonical or after two warnings, he would automatically lose office without the church declaring that loss of office. And I think that that's not really a strong, he doesn't have the strong position there. I think that Cajetan or John of St. Thomas had a better position in that argument. But again, those are just opinions. So upon what basis does Jay Dyer assert this opinion? And again, he's also not making any kind of distinctions between like private, a heretic as a private person, or heresy non-definitively taught in his office, or heresy taught ex cathedra or something like that. He's not making any of these distinctions. He's just kind of assuming.
So if Francis, and all of these people say he's defected, if he's defected, how is he the head of the body that he's not even a member?
Well, the people who say he's defected have left the Catholic Church and they go elsewhere. They go to Benevacantism, they go to Sedevacantism, they join you and some radical version of Eastern Orthodoxy. Those people do leave. I don't know any of them that has said Pope Francis has defected from the faith and I'm still in communion with my local bishops who is in communion with Pope. Maybe they're out there, but I don't know those people. The more common position would be to say that Pope Francis teaches heresy, but they will say, but I don't know if he's defected from the faith. You know, I don't know if he's the Pope or not. That's your Taylor Marshall position that says Pope Francis teaches heresy, but I can't formally declare him to be, you know, an anti-Pope or to not be the Pope. You're practically already set of a contest once you've adopted into that, but I don't think that you've actually, you know, made the move just yet.
Was Martin Luther still a Roman Catholic when he defected?
All right. So, but again, Martin Luther was a priest. He wasn't the Pope. And so the question is, how does private heresy work in relation to the one who occupies the chair of St. Peter? That's what's debated. We do have in canon law what happens for a layman. However, we don't have in canon law what happens for a pope. Okay.
I mean, this is so just silly. Like this system is preposterous.
I would say a lot of things in Jay Dyer's system is also preposterous. So I honestly would say that there's some things where I think he's just being inconsistent. But yeah, I grant that they're in different areas than the radical traditionalists where Jay Dyer is being inconsistent. So it's a different ball game. But once again, maybe check out my Eastern Orthodoxy playlist. You'll start to see that.
And yet all of these people are engaged in just constant doublethink, telling you that he's indefectible, he's infallible.
Which you already accepted. You remember that in the Sixth Ecumenical Council. Remember that in the Formula of Hermisdus. Remember that in the Seventh Ecumenical Council. You've already accepted that. This is double talk from Jay Dyer.
He's the vicar of Jesus and the successor to Peter. He is the...
Which you've effectively already accepted in the ecumenical councils, like Chalcedon, that speaks of the Pope as being head of all the churches. Is he no longer the head? Okay, well, who is that head now? Constantinople? Do you believe that? You're not in communion with Constantinople because in Eastern Orthodoxy, they have a huge internal schism going on between Moscow, Constantinople, and Moscow and Alexandria, among a few others. And right now, he's not in communion with Constantinople because he's part of Rocor, a breakaway group. Well, I want to say breakaway group. They're currently in communion right now with Moscow. They broke away for a while and then returned back to communion with Moscow. And a lot of them still commemorate the Patriarch of Moscow, which is a problem because the Patriarch of Moscow has openly endorsed the murder that's going on right now in Ukraine. And so a lot of people are upset about that. And a lot of people are upset with Moscow. And Jay Dyer's in communion with him, but he's not in communion with Constantinople. So that head of the church that was spoken of there in Chalcedon, where is that head? It was Rome. I would imagine at one point they would say it transferred to Constantinople. Okay. Are you one of those who says it's now Moscow? So the head of the churches, Moscow, is allowing for and endorsing the war in Ukraine? Is that your position? I'd love some clarification there.
Embodiment of the living magisterium, but he's an apostate. He teaches heresy nonstop. He doesn't teach the gospel. He wars against tradition, against the mass, and against the liturgy.
Question all that. Question all that. You radical traditionalists who've bought into that, you need to question all that. I have a whole playlist for you. It's called Traditional Catholicism. I only called it that. I don't think it's traditional Catholicism. Only called it that because I thought it would be a little bit friendlier than just labeling the playlist Radical Traditional Catholicism. Also, it's shorter, but I don't think that radical Catholicism is actually traditional Catholicism. But go and check that playlist, and you will see the problems with every one of those things that Jay Dyer has just said. Question those things.
Okay, that's called doublethink. That's called contradictions. Can you guys are all...
Yeah, and let me throw this right back at you, Jay. You guys were in communion with the West that was teaching the filioque. According to your own Orthodox scholars, by the 6th century, you have a near universal consensus in the West of the filioque. You guys were in communion with filioquists. Were you in communion with heretics? And these filioquists were also teaching the papal claims. You guys were in communion with them. Explain that to me. How does that work?
Always worshiping logic in the Roman Catholic world. Can you see that that's a contradiction? You can't be both of those things at the same time. Well, actually, maybe in the Roman Catholic world, you can. Thus, the inner psychological division that occurs in so many Roman Catholics.
No, in the Catholic world, just like the rest of the objective world, you can't have this kind of contradiction, right? So this is not, the thing that, okay, well, in Catholicism, you can have this internal contradiction or something. No, you can't. You can't. But question that. Question whether there actually is an internal inconsistency here. And again, my question to you, Jay, is 1848, your patriarchs are signing off on a document written to the Pope saying that in the first millennium and in the ancient church, the West was Orthodox. Okay. But you guys are also saying the West was adhering to the filioque at that time. Your own scholars are admitting that. All right. That's double talk. Figure that one out for me.
Where they're actually at war with themselves internally and against all their their fellow trads too, because there's nobody that hates.
That sounds a lot like Orthodoxy right now. They're currently, sadly, I hate to say this, but at war with each other right now. A lot of them are. Some of them aren't, but a lot of them are at war with each other. And I do think that that's a problem. It's something that we as Catholics should not be happy about, because as I've noted, we want reunion with Eastern Orthodox. Well, that's going to be harder to do when Eastern Orthodoxy is fragmenting into groups. And so we can't have reunion with a fragmented group. All we can do is start to work at reunion with smaller groups who do not all recognize each other. And so that's going to be a problem. It's a lot harder to work towards reunion when it's fragmenting in the way that it is.
More than a trad hates another trad. I mean, they divide more than Protestants do. So
I would say the same about a lot of aspects to Eastern Orthodoxy. There's a lot of divisions there. Again, go and look up the Trad Orthodox, or the True Orthodox video that I did where I showed that, unfortunately.
It's obvious to anybody who can read a few of these Roman Catholic documents, I think, that really the root of the problem isn't Vatican II. And this is what so many trads can't accept, because they won't read Vatican I. You can tell them all day long. You can tell classical theists and all these people endlessly to read Vatican I. They will not read it. Or when they go read it, they'll just ignore or just pass over any of the arguments that you make.
Okay, so his thing is Vatican II is not the problem. Vatican I is the problem. Okay, well, why does Alexander Schmemann, an Orthodox scholar and priest, himself admit that the formula of Hermesis that over 250 bishops in the East signed, including the Patriarch of Constantinople, the East accepted there at the time universally the formula of Hermisdus, which teaches the papal claims. And Schmemann says the whole essence of Vatican I is right there in the formula of Hermisdus, being signed off by the Eastern bishops. What does that say about you? The East already accepted the papal claims. And if you're saying they're wrong, okay, well, upon what basis are you going to then point me to those same Eastern fathers and their Christology and say that they're right? If they're wrong in their ecclesiology, they could be wrong in their Christology.
Because of all of the same psychological motivations of confirmation bias, cognitive dissonance that the white paper talks about, right? The way the white paper talks about the draft and the manipulation of the draft is no different than the system that you've adopted of the Roman Catholic Church, that you must at all costs cope and invent all the time, constant. It's like a hamster wheel of coping.
What's up with the Orthodox chanting in the background to this video?
And inventing new things to make this crazy system work.
And it is going to take down the
He makes the video sound a whole lot more solemn than it actually is.
whole new world order, this ridiculous new world order of yours. The truth will win out in the end, and it will not be served by any of us in the church or in politics or anywhere else, burying our heads in the sand because we cannot handle the ramification of asking the question, what's going on? What's happening?
Yeah, here it is. So this is the point that we made against throughout the whole issue with Trent Horn in the debate, is Francis signing the humanitarian Abu Dhabi Accord, whatever it is, with the Grand Imam, that
an argument that the Sedevacantists are also using.
The Abrahamic religions are all worshiping the same God.
Of Al-Hazar, Ahmed Al-Tayyib is beginning to show concrete results.
Now, if Michael Matt can see this and he can admit the point that we're making, why can't Trent admit this? Oh, well, Trent gets a paycheck from Catholic Answers. So, I mean, come on, guys.
So that was very uncharitable of Jay. I want to call you to repentance. That's called rash judgment, evil suspicion. That is a sin in the Bible. So I would like to charitably call you to repentance, Jay. You should not be doing that publicly. You assumed that he's dishonest because of a paycheck, and that's not okay. Why didn't you just give him the judgment of charity and just say, well, Trent Horn maintains what he believes or says because he actually believes it, and that if he believed otherwise and that was inconsistent with the paycheck he's drawing, he would shift careers? Why didn't you offer him the judgment of charity? Why this rash judgment that you're disseminating publicly? You're slaying somebody with your words, and that's a sin in Scripture. My problem here, aside from the inconsistency with Jay Dyer, is, Jay, if you're right, I would never know it by your life and your behavior. I would never know it. You're not showing us sanctity. You're not showing us holiness. If you're right, we would not know it by your behavior. And I want to call you to repentance there.
The Higher Committee for Human Fraternity presented their first major project while in New York. This initiative is a tribute to Abraham, whom Jews, Christians, and Muslims see as a common father. It's called the Abrahamic Family House. It's a complex that will integrate a church.
So he says, no, they don't. Look, we can say in a qualified sense that Jews, Muslims, and Christians worship the same God, but there's also a sense in which we need to, again, make some very serious qualifications here. Muslims direct their worship towards the God of Abraham. But it is certainly an imperfection in their understanding, because the God that we worship, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is a Trinitarian God. And they don't believe that. So they have an imperfect understanding of the one true God. And this is John Damascene's position in the first millennium. So he sees that, Damascene sees Islam as a Christian heresy. How can he do that if he believed that they were worshiping a different God? And Dyer highly reveres Damascene. Was Damascene, embracing heresy there? And by the way, for Catholics who have problems with this, Pope Pius X actually taught the exact same thing. It should not be a problem to say that they imperfectly worship the one true God. I don't think they do so salvifically. Nobody has said that they're doing so salvifically. The Catholic Church has not said that. The orientation, the direction of their worship may be imperfectly towards the one true God, but I don't think that it's filled with grace. I don't think that it's salvific. So it doesn't attain any kind of supernatural end. And it is imperfect because they don't believe in the Trinity. But this shouldn't be a problem because we already accept this when it comes to the Jews. Do the Jews maintain the Trinity? No. Okay, are you going to say that the Jews worship a different God than the one true God? Is that really your position? I sure hope you're not going to say they worship a different God. You would hopefully say that they worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that's the one true God, but they worship him imperfectly. And there's no salvation in the Mosaic covenant. I hope that would be your qualified position. But to just say again that they worship the one true God, I'm fine with that as long as it's being acknowledged it's imperfect, which Catholicism, we acknowledge it's imperfect. And as long as we're saying that, okay, well, there's no salvation in that. If there's salvation, it's only in Christ, which the Catholic Church affirms Lumen Gentium 14. So this shouldn't be a problem.
Mosque and synagogue.
And by the way, I mean, Patriarch Kirill that Jay Dyer's in communion with maintains explicitly that Muslims worship the one true God, the same God as the Orthodox Christians. I showed a video of that. In the video where I'm reviewing true versus fake Orthodox, I put the video there in the show notes where I'm going over all these breakaway groups. I'm showing, well, they broke away in part because they see that Kirill and others are saying, hey, Muslims worship the one true God. And they say, that's heresy, therefore I have to break communion with them. My question is, Jay, why are you still in communion with Kirill? Or have your bishops broken communion with Kirill? Are they no longer commemorating him at the very least? Maybe clarify that for us. Let me know. Does your bishop commemorate Kirill? Are they in communion with Kirill? I'm curious. Are you in communion with a guy who says, aside from the whole war issue, are you in communion with a guy who says that Muslims worship the same God as the Orthodox? Are you being internally consistent here, Jay?
Which for the first time will share a collective space for dialogue between the religions. It was designed by architect Sir David Ajavi and seeks to deepen relationships between religions as well.
And remember, according to Trent, yeah, we all do worship the same God because we worship one God. And even though we showed, I mean, I don't know how many times we had to illustrate that that's a fallacy.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to say that about your own patriarch that you're in communion with? To my knowledge, are you no longer in communion with him? Let me know. That would be an interesting turn of events. That Jay's now no longer in communion, not only with the Patriarch of Constantinople, Jay's bishop's also not in communion then with Moscow. That would be interesting.
Right? The quantifier shift fallacy. They don't care. Like, okay, I don't care. It's not the quantifier shift fallacy because it's not. I mean, clearly it is, but I guess if you just say it isn't, then on the Roman Catholic system, because
he literally just asserted that it is. He did not demonstrate that it is. And he's then refuting, or he's then criticizing people who just say that it isn't, when all he did was say that it is.
It's all just worship of authority. I guess you can just say it isn't and it's not.
Nurture the values of peaceful coexistence.
Go ye therefore and convert all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Well, that's not the way it is anymore.
That's not true. Pope Francis affirms that, as I've already demonstrated in the video, where he is perfectly on board with evangelization. So again, go and watch the evangelization versus proselytism video, and you'll see that they are wrong.
So Michael Matt is saying that the Vatican II apparatus does not teach the gospel. It's not that way anymore, he says. Oh, so
why has Jay irresponsibly bought into this? Why hasn't he done better research and seen that Pope Francis doesn't maintain this and Vatican II doesn't maintain that position?
the supreme teacher and infallible authority of all Christians, according to Vatican I, according to Satis Cognitum, according to Mystici Corporis, does not teach
All of these documents that Jay has a deficient view on, by the way.
the gospel and has abandoned it. But he is still the supreme, infallible, indefectible teacher of all Christians.
My problem is if Jay Dyer is deficient in his research on this particular claim, upon what basis do we consider him an authority elsewhere? It's a legitimate question. If his research is poor in one area, could it be that it's poor elsewhere? Maybe, maybe not. It could be that he's more efficient and more responsible elsewhere. But I do put that into question. I do see a few super chats here. Let me grab those. I think I made my point, so we'll stop there. Mike Irish asks, I've heard people say that there's no Eastern Orthodox Church, but there are Eastern Orthodox churches, implying that they are not one church, accurate or not. You know, they're going to say that they're one in faith, worship, and governance. But I do have some questions there, because you do have internal schisms right now between some of the autocephalous churches. And so how do you still speak of one? And Josiah Trenum, Father Josiah Trenum, an Orthodox priest, recently did a video severely critiquing his own Eastern Orthodox on this question. So maybe go and check that out. So I do have some serious questions on how can the Orthodox really still claim to be one. So they would say that they're one, even though they're autocephalous churches. They're one in faith, worship, and governance. And so they're the one church of the creed. But I do have some questions there. I think there was another super chat. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see. According to Jay, Jesus and St. Paul was wrong for recognizing that non-Christian monotheists worship the same God, but in a false way. Okay. I'll have to look into what he said there. I think I remember in one debate, he was saying that, the fathers in the Old Testament believed in the Trinity, if I recall correctly. And he'll base it on certain things from the Gospel of John, if I recall correctly. But I think he's just reading too much into them. I think they implicitly believed in the Trinity, but I don't believe that the people in the Old Covenant explicitly were aware of the Trinity. No, I think that came through New Testament revelation. But I do think it's implicit, like they were starting to realize that there's a plurality to God. They were realizing that, especially by the time of the first century. There's a sense in which God is one, but there's also a sense in which we can speak of two powers. And so they're starting to see, that stuff. But I don't think that it was like explicit. They formulated the doctrine of the Trinity or something like that. I think that comes from New Testament revelation. I think that's it for the super chats there. So I believe I grabbed them both. Anyways, we're at an hour, so we'll go ahead and end it there. I hope this has been helpful. Let me know your thoughts there in the comment section. Be charitable. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and of course, check me out, patreon.com/reason and theology. If you appreciated this content and you believe what I'm doing and you want to support me and you want to get access to extra content, certainly check me out there. Again, patreon.com/reason and theology. I'm actually going to post some new content today. And also, if you want my course on teaching authority, the magisterium, how does it work? The odds and ends, A to Z, if you will. Go to understanding the the course is understanding the magisterium, but you're going to go to maximusinstitute.com. So maximusinstitute.com, click on the understanding the magisterium course and certainly check that out. All right, y'all. I hope y'all enjoyed it. We'll see y'all later. God bless you all.
Oh wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless. Hey RNT fans, just a quick word about one of our sponsors, Verbum, an excellent Bible and theological software. Go to verbum.com/reason. You'll support what we're doing here at Reason and Theology. You'll also get 10% off any of the packages that you choose, along with 5 free extra books. Again, verbum.com/reason.
If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent. Now, that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about the pro-life cause, call them now.